Television was in its infancy. Well, I thought it was just another job, so I took it. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine what would happen to us.
But before her death, Vivian Vance revealed something that shattered that perfect picture. She had carried the truth for years, a truth hidden behind the laughter, the rehearsals, and the fame. Her confession wasn't just surprising, it was unsettling. Why did she hold it in for so long? And what exactly did she finally admit about one of television's most beloved shows? Stay with us to know. Vivian Vance breaks her silence on I Love Lucy. Vivian Vance was adored by millions as Ethel Mertz, the quick-witted neighbor whose banter with Lucy Ricardo became television gold. To viewers, she seemed to embody warmth, humor, and loyalty, the perfect counterpart to Lucille Ball's zany brilliance. On August 17, 1979, Hollywood lost one of its brightest comedic stars when Vivian Vance passed away at the age of 70. After years of battling breast cancer, the illness had finally spread, leaving her frail but still remembered for her unshakable spirit. In her final months, she spent quiet days in California with her husband, John Dodds, who remained devotedly by her side until the end. Tributes poured in from across the entertainment world, with Desi Arnaz calling her not only a gifted actress, but also a dear friend, and Lucille Ball weeping as she remembered the woman who had stood by her through triumphs and heartbreak. Vivian's death marked the end of an era, but before she left the stage of life, she made sure to reveal truths about I Love Lucy that changed how fans remembered the show forever. By the time Vivian began sharing these confessions, she was already fighting her most difficult battle. In 1973, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, a disease that spread despite multiple treatments. Chemotherapy and surgeries took a toll on her health, weakening her body but not her spirit. She continued to make public appearances, often smiling through the pain, but those closest to her knew she was living with the knowledge that her time was limited. As her condition worsened, she found herself reflecting deeply on her career and the legacy that had defined her. One of the most striking things Vivian admitted was how different the off-screen world was compared to what fans imagined. For decades, audiences have believed that the cast of a sitcom were just like the characters they played, cheerful, close-knit, and full of genuine affection. But according to Vivian, that was an illusion crafted for television. The actors may have been professional enough to pull off that illusion, but when the cameras stopped rolling, the atmosphere was far more complicated. There were tensions that simmered quietly, rules imposed by the studio that made life suffocating, and personal battles that no one watching from home could ever have guessed. Vivian herself carried much of that weight. She revealed that she often felt trapped in the role of Ethel Mertz. At first, being cast in such a groundbreaking sitcom was thrilling. It was an opportunity that brought her fame, financial security, and the admiration of millions. Yet as the years went by, the very thing that made her famous became a prison. Her honesty in those final years gave fans a rare look at the cost of comedy. It wasn't just about rehearsals, lines, or pratfalls. It was about the sacrifices an actress made for a role that would both elevate her and confine her forever. Vivian never denied her gratitude for the opportunity, but she also made it clear that the laughter on screen had come at a price. The most shocking truth she exposed came from her on-screen marriage to Fred Mertz, a relationship poisoned from day one. The secret war with William Frawley. When Vivian Vance first signed on to I Love Lucy, she expected a chance to showcase her comedic talent in a role that would bring her national recognition. What she did not expect was to be paired with William Frawley, a seasoned actor more than 2 decades her senior, as her on-screen husband Fred Mertz. The decision stunned her. Off-camera, Vivian was vibrant, attractive, and in her early 40s, while Frawley was pushing his 60s with a rough edge that came from years of hard living in Hollywood. The pairing struck her as odd, even laughable, and, in a moment of candor, she commented that no one would believe a woman like her would marry a man that much older. That single remark became the spark of a feud that never went out. Frawley, already known for having a quick temper and sharp tongue, took her words as a personal insult. Instead of brushing it off, he carried the resentment with him for the rest of the show's run. From that day forward, their working relationship was marked not by warmth, but by a cold disdain that seeped into every interaction they had behind the scenes. On screen, however, the situation was different. As Ethel and Fred Mertz, the couple provided comic relief as Lucy and Ricky Ricardo's quirky landlords. Their banter, bickering, and occasional teamwork made them a beloved television duo. Audiences adored their chemistry, never suspecting that the laughter concealed bitterness. The truth was that every line delivered, every argument acted out, and every moment of spousal annoyance they portrayed had an edge of reality in it. What fans saw as scripted comedy often came from a well of genuine irritation. Behind the cameras, their relationship never improved. The two exchanged barbed comments, sometimes muttered under their breath, sometimes aimed at one another during rehearsals. Frawley, who had a history of drinking and a reputation for being difficult, often pushed the tension further with sarcastic remarks that stung. Vivian, for her part, refused to back down, and her wit was sharp enough to return fire. The crew grew accustomed to the undercurrent of hostility, and while most avoided stepping into the crossfire, they could not ignore the iciness that hung in the air whenever Fred and Ethel had to share the set. Despite this, both Vance and Frawley remained consummate professionals. They understood that whatever personal dislike they carried, the success of the show depended on their ability to perform as a believable couple. So they did just that. In front of the studio audience, they bickered with comedic timing that made people roar with laughter. They played off one another with precision, giving the impression of a long-married pair whose squabbles were more affectionate than cruel. The illusion was so seamless that many viewers believed they must have been friends in real life. The irony was that the truth could not have been further from it. Vivian later admitted in interviews that the relationship was beyond repair. She recalled, "Bill and I never got along. From the very beginning, we simply couldn't stand each other. But we were actors and we did our jobs. The funny thing is, people thought our bickering was love. It wasn't. It was the only real thing about Fred and Ethel." Her words revealed that the secret to their comedic chemistry was not affection, but animosity harnessed in the name of performance. There were even moments when their feud became legendary among the crew. It was said that Frawley would sometimes mutter under his breath about Vivian in language too harsh to be repeated, while Vivian herself once admitted privately that she dreaded scenes that required too much closeness with him. The professional mask held, but behind it was a deep dislike that never softened. Unlike other co-star rivalries in Hollywood that cooled over time, there's never reached reconciliation. Yet, in a strange way, the tension may have added to their performances. The sharpness of Ethel's complaints and Fred's stubborn retorts carried an authenticity that only real emotion could provide. What began as a misstep in casting created one of television's most memorable comedic pairings, a duo whose friction was the fuel for their funniest moments. For Vivian, however, the strain was real and lasting. Playing Ethel was already a challenge, but being tied to an actor who openly resented her added a layer of difficulty that fans never saw. It was one of the earliest cracks in the picture-perfect world of I Love Lucy, proof that even in the midst of television history being made, human relationships could not be scripted. Yet if clashing with Frawley was painful, surviving Lucille Ball's perfectionism demanded even greater strength. Let's tell you what she said about it. Life under Lucille Ball for Vivian Vance. Stepping into the world of Lucille was both exhilarating and overwhelming. In her interviews, she described what it was like to work under Lucille's watchful eye, admitting Lucy was tireless. She could rehearse a scene over and over until the timing was so sharp it cut like glass. You couldn't afford to miss a beat with her. From the very beginning, Vivian realized that her role as Ethel Mertz would require more than simply learning her lines. Timing was everything. Physical comedy had to be executed with precision, and delivery had to land with just the right rhythm. Lucille expected everyone around her to rise to her level of commitment. She was a perfectionist in the truest sense, Vivian explained. If the rhythm wasn't there, if the laugh didn't come where she wanted it, we'd do it again and again until it did. For Vivian, who had built her reputation on stage acting, This was a crash course in a new kind of comedy, one that lived or died on the sharpness of its delivery. At first, the pressure weighed heavily. Vivian often felt as though she was running to catch up with Lucy's relentless pace. She admitted, "I was scared to death in those early days. Lucy had such natural brilliance, and I was just trying not to get swallowed up in it." Playing the straight woman to Lucy's outrageous antics was not easy. Vivian had to ground the scenes while still keeping her own presence alive, a balance she sometimes felt she struggled to maintain. But over time, the tension began to transform into admiration. Vivian learned to recognize the genius in Lucy's drive and her uncanny sense for what would make an audience laugh. In her candid reflections, she said, "You couldn't help but admire her. She had an instinct for comedy that was unmatched. Being alongside her made me better, even when it was hard." What started as intimidation eventually became an education, and Vivian credited Lucille for pushing her to discover her own strengths as a comedic performer. That didn't mean the relationship was always easy. Lucille's larger-than-life personality often dominated the set, leaving Vivian feeling overshadowed. There were days when she wondered if her role would always be reduced to being the sidekick, the less glamorous friend who simply set up Lucy's punchlines. She admitted, "There were times I felt invisible next to her. But then there were those moments when Ethel got her chance, and I realized Lucy had given me that space on purpose. She wanted me to shine too." This acknowledgement revealed the complicated but genuine bond that developed between the two women. As the years went on, Lucille leaned on Vivian for more than just performances. When her marriage to Desi Arnaz began to crumble, it was Vivian who stood quietly by her side, offering comfort without judgment. Lucille admitted in an interview, "Viv was my rock. I could trust her with anything. She was the one who steadied me when everything else felt like it was falling apart." Their friendship grew deeper than Hollywood expected from two co-stars who began as professional rivals of sorts. Vivian became a part of Lucille's inner circle, not just a castmate, but family. She spent time with Lucy and Desi's children, taking on the role of an aunt, and often joined the family outside of the studio. In her final reflections, Vivian called Lucille the sister I never had, a testament to how far their relationship had come from those first uneasy years of working together. Theirs was a partnership built on tension, admiration, and ultimately love. It was a reminder that even in the high-pressure world of television, where egos often clashed, genuine connection could still be forged. Vivian knew how difficult Lucy could be, but she also knew how extraordinary she was. "I owe so much to her," she once said. "She challenged me, frustrated me, and inspired me all at once. Without Lucy, there would never have been an Ethel." Yet, even as this friendship became one of the most important relationships in her life, it could not protect Vivian from the harsh realities of working in Hollywood. While Lucy may have demanded perfection and performance, it was the studio that controlled everything else. But friendship couldn't shield Vivian from another harsh truth. You would be surprised to know about it. The studio's harsh demands for millions of fans. Ethel Mertz became the symbol of a typical American housewife in the 1950s, slightly frumpy, practical, and always ready to join Lucy in her misadventures. But the image that audiences adored was carefully crafted by Desilu Productions, and it came at a personal cost to Vivian Vance. She revealed in interviews that much of what the audience saw was not simply acting, but the result of studio mandates that controlled her body, her clothing, and even her identity. One of the strictest rules was about her weight. Executives at Desilu believed that in order for Lucy Ricardo to stand out, her sidekick had to look less glamorous. Vivian recalled with bitterness, "They told me straight out, you have to keep your weight up so Lucy looks better." Can you imagine how that feels for a woman? It was a policy she deeply resented. Off-screen, Vivian was naturally stylish and enjoyed dressing elegantly, but the producers didn't want Ethel to be seen as attractive. They wanted her to play the foil to Lucy's charm. "It was humiliating," she admitted in the conversation. "I had to fight my own instincts. I knew I looked better thinner, but the studio didn't want me that way. They wanted me to look plain." To make matters worse, her wardrobe and makeup were deliberately chosen to reinforce this frumpy persona. gone with the fashionable dresses and flattering hairstyles she loved in her personal life. Instead, she was fitted with dowdy clothes and unflattering makeup designed to age her beyond her years. "I hated those dresses," Vivian said bluntly in an interview. "They made me feel 10 years older every time I put them on. And the wigs, the powder, they took away every bit of glamour I had." What audiences thought was simply Ethel's character was, in truth, a carefully enforced disguise that stripped Vivian of her own identity. The contrast between her on-screen image and her real self was sharp. Off the set, Vivian was known among friends for her poise and sense of style. She carried herself with elegance, loved fine clothes, and enjoyed the life of a woman who had spent years in the theater. This made the transformation into Ethel even more painful. She confessed that it was often hard to look at herself in the mirror after long days of filming. "It wasn't me up there," she reflected. "It was someone the studio created, and I had to live with her whether I liked it or not." Despite her resentment, Vivian obeyed the rules. She knew that openly challenging Desilu could put her career at risk, and at that time, actors had little control over how they were portrayed. "You didn't argue with the studio," she explained. "They told you what to wear, how to look, even how much you should weigh. If you wanted the job, you did it." These words paint a stark picture of early television, where even stars of a hit show had little say in their own image. The demands weighed heavily on her, not just physically, but emotionally. She sometimes felt she was living a double life: Vivian Vance, the glamorous woman, and Ethel Mertz, the dowdy housewife who stole her reflection. The pressure added to her frustration with being typecast, as she found it nearly impossible to convince casting directors that she could play anything other than Ethel. She lamented, "They couldn't see past the apron and the house dresses. That wasn't who I was, but it's all anyone remembered." Yet, for all the humiliation, Vivian pushed forward with professionalism. She gave the role her all, finding ways to inject warmth and humor into Ethel, even when she disliked the way she was forced to look. It was a quiet rebellion of sorts. Though the studio controlled her appearance, she made sure her spirit shone through. Audiences may not have seen the woman she truly was, but they felt the heart she poured into the role. And if the image control wasn't enough, the grueling reality of live television brought even more pressure. The exhaustion of live performance. Vivian recalled how demanding the process was. Each episode began with table reads, then moved into full blocking rehearsals that stretched late into the night. Every gesture, every pause, every pratfall had to be drilled until it became second nature. As Vivian put it, "We sweated over every laugh." People thought it just happened, but nothing on that show was by accident. The schedule was relentless. Monday through Wednesday were spent rehearsing. Thursday meant camera blocking. Friday was the live taping. Vivian described it as living inside a pressure cooker. What made it even more intense was the knowledge that Friday's performance would play out before a studio audience of hundreds. This was no safety rehearsal. There were no second takes once the cameras rolled. You could hear the audience breathing with you, she explained. If they laughed, it carried you higher. If they stayed quiet, your stomach dropped. That kind of pressure is hard to describe unless you've lived it. The immediacy of audience reaction was both thrilling and brutal. Vivian admitted she sometimes dreaded walking onto the stage, terrified that a joke would misfire. Yet, when everything clicked, the feeling was unmatched. It was like being on Broadway every week, she said proudly. The applause was real, the laughter was real, and for a few minutes you felt like you belonged to those people. But this energy came at a cost. The rehearsals were physically punishing. Scenes often required Vivian to run, fall, or react with exaggerated expression, all while maintaining her timing with Lucy. She remembered evenings when she went home aching, her voice hoarse from constant projection. "I would lie down at night and still hear the laughter ringing in my head," she confessed. It never really left you. A single missed cue could ruin an entire scene, and that fear kept the cast on edge. The pressure to be funny is the hardest pressure there is, Vivian reflected. It wasn't enough to be good. You had to be perfect every Friday night. That pursuit of perfection demanded discipline, but it also wore her down year after year. The role of Ethel Mertz, so carefully constructed for comedy, clung to her long after filming ended. Offers for new projects rarely came, and when they did, they were often roles cut from the same mold. Vivian recognized the irony. "The thing that made me famous also made me invisible," she admitted. Producers didn't see Vivian Vance. They only saw Ethel. Still, she never denied the pride she felt in what they created. For all the exhaustion and sacrifice, she acknowledged that the show's magic came from those live performances, when cast and audience shared something that could not be manufactured. "It was terrifying, it was exhilarating, and it was the hardest work of my life," she said. Still, through exhaustion and frustration, one thing kept her going. Let's tell you what it was. Friendship, family, and private struggles. Lucille Ball often invited Vivian into her home, and in time, she became an aunt to Lucy and Desi Arnaz's children. Lucy and Desi Jr., the children, adored her, and Vivian treasured the role. "I always felt like part of their family," she recalled warmly in the interview. "Those kids meant the world to me, and Lucy trusted me with them. That a bond you can't fake." This closeness extended beyond playful afternoons or dinners at the Arnaz home. Vivian was present through the cracks that began to show in Lucy and Desi's marriage. The glamorous couple that America adored was, in reality, fighting bitter battles behind closed doors. Vivian, who was often at Lucy's side during those years, became a quiet anchor. She admitted, "Lucy leaned on me during the hardest times. She could put on a brave face for the cameras, but when the day was over, she needed someone who wasn't going to judge her. I try to be that person." Lucille herself acknowledged this in later interviews, calling Vivian her rock and the person she turned to when her world seemed to be falling apart. Vivian was steady, patient, and fiercely loyal, qualities that allowed her to step in as more than a co-star. Their bond went beyond Hollywood camaraderie. It was a sisterhood forged under the strain of success and personal heartbreak. Yet while she was a source of strength for Lucille, Vivian privately battled demons of her own. Fame had brought her recognition, but also isolation. She often felt underappreciated, overshadowed by Lucy's towering star power, and boxed into the image of Ethel Mertz. In one candid moment, she confessed, "The audience loved Ethel, but sometimes I wondered if anyone loved Vivian. I felt like I had disappeared behind her apron." This feeling of invisibility haunted her, even as she basked in the adoration of fans who recognized her everywhere she went. Vivian also admitted, "It was like being locked in a room where the walls kept closing in. I couldn't step outside of Ethel, no matter how hard I tried." She fought to find new opportunities, but the industry rarely allowed her to break free. While she did not speak often of her struggles, she acknowledged moments of despair when she felt suffocated by the expectations placed on her. She said quietly, "People think you're living a dream, but sometimes it feels more like a cage." Friends later noted that she carried her pain with grace, rarely allowing the public to see her vulnerability. Still, despite these struggles, the friendship she shared with Lucille remained a lifeline. The two women leaned on each other in ways few could understand. When Vivian's cancer battle entered its final stages, Lucy was among those who stayed close. She later said in a rare moment of public grief, "Losing Viv was like losing a part of myself." It was a tribute that underscored the depth of love and respect between them, a friendship that had endured decades of work, fame, and hardship. Apart from professional struggles, let's tell you how Vivian's personal life was a roller coaster of emotions and losses. Love, loss, and lasting legacy behind the laughter that made her famous. Vivian Vance lived a private life filled with both heartbreak and resilience. Her 4 marriages reflected a turbulent journey in search of stability and love, a search that mirrored the challenges she faced in her career. She admitted more than once that while audiences knew her as the quick-witted Ethel Mertz, her real life was far more complicated. Her first marriage came early, before fame had touched her name. In 1928, she married Joseph Danek, a union that seemed promising but lasted only 3 years. Vivian rarely spoke about this period, But she acknowledged later that she was too young, too focused on her ambitions to balance both marriage and career. The Great Depression had made life difficult, and her desire to chase a life on the stage could not be contained by a conventional partnership. "I was restless," she said years later. "I wanted something bigger than the life I had. Joe was a good man, but I wasn't ready to settle." Her second marriage, to George Koch in 1934, offered another attempt at domestic happiness, but it too unraveled within 6 years. By this time, Vivian was fully immersed in the New York theater world, building her reputation as a talented stage actress. The demands of constant rehearsals, travel, and financial instability weighed heavily on the relationship. Friends of the couple noted that her growing ambition clashed with the quiet life Koch preferred. Vivian later reflected, "The theater consumed me. I was hungry for success, and it cost me the marriage." It was her third marriage, to actor and theatrical manager Philip Ober in 1941, that would leave the deepest scars. On the surface, their union looked stable. They remained together for nearly 2 decades, covering the years of Vivian's greatest success with I Love Lucy. But behind closed doors, the relationship was troubled. Allegations of jealousy and abuse cast a shadow over their years together. Ober's career never reached the same heights as Vivian's, and those close to her suggested that his resentment often spilled into cruelty. Though she did not discuss the details publicly, Vivian once admitted, "It was a marriage filled with storms. I stayed longer than I should have, but in those days, women often did." Eventually, the marriage collapsed, leaving Vivian determined to never again let her private life be dictated by resentment or bitterness. In 1961, she found what she had long been searching for in John Dodds, a literary agent and publisher who valued her for who she was, not just for her fame. With him, she discovered the peace and support that had eluded her in earlier years. They settled in Stamford, Connecticut, and later moved to California, where Vivian could remain connected to her colleagues, but also enjoy a quieter life. She spoke tenderly of him in interviews, calling him the kind of man who doesn't compete with you, but walks beside you. Dodd stood by her faithfully through her declining health, proving himself a true partner until her final days. Vivian's last years were marked by her battle with breast cancer, a struggle she faced with courage and dignity. Her family honored her memory by donating her Emmy Award to the Albuquerque Little Theater, the stage where her journey had first begun decades earlier. It was a symbolic gesture that tied her legacy back to her roots, reminding the world that before Hollywood, Vivian was a passionate performer who had dreamed of a life in the arts. Vivian Vance's story forces us to ask, what is the true cost of bringing laughter to millions? And is the price of fame ever really worth it? Share your thoughts on it in the comments.